Most know this story as David's, the shepherd boy who became king, the warrior who conquered giants, the ruler who fell, then rose again by the mercy of God. Yes, his name dominates the chapters, the sermons, the songs, and somewhere in the margins of that legacy, there's her. Bathsheba. Often reduced to a silhouette behind a curtain, a woman whose name is invoked only when sin is discussed. But what if we've only seen a fraction of the truth? Today, we return to that palace rooftop, not to excuse or condemn, but to see. Not through the eyes of a king, but through the heart of a woman whose world was torn apart, rebuilt, and ultimately woven into the divine plan of redemption. This is Bathsheba's story, and once you hear it, you'll never forget her again. If this kind of storytelling stirs something in you, please consider subscribing to our channel, Sacred Wisdom, because here, we don't just tell Bible stories. We rediscover them through voices long silenced and lives that still echo today. Now let the story of Bathsheba unfold. Bathsheba was born in a family that seemed to have its fate intertwined with the most striking events in Israel. Her father, Eliam, was known for his bravery as one of King David's elite warriors, men of courage who lived to protect the kingdom. Her grandfather, Ahithophel, was a wise counselor, someone whose voice was carefully heard in the corridors of power. At that time, families like hers lived surrounded by duty and honor, but also under the weight of expectations and court intrigues. Just imagine, Jerusalem was seething. It was a city where each stone seemed to whisper stories of kings, battles, and the promise of a future in God's hands. Bathsheba grew up in this environment, listening to stories of the chosen people and the victories that put Israel on the map as a strong nation. She must have been a young woman with a restless soul, like many at that time, full of dreams but aware of the responsibilities that came with her position. As was common for women of her lineage, Bathsheba married young to an honorable man named Uriah, who, like her father, served King David as one of his loyal warriors. The two lived in Jerusalem near the court, but also close to the dangers and dramas involving the kingdom's big names. Every step she took was somehow watched by attentive eyes, in a world that always expected more from those connected to the throne. She seemed to live a quiet life behind the scenes of the main stage, until one seemingly ordinary day changed the course of her life forever. It was just the beginning of a series of events that would lead Bathsheba to become one of the most important and controversial figures in Israel's history. That day started like any other. The sun spread across the city of Jerusalem, its golden light reflecting on rooftops, while residents followed their daily routine. In the king's palace, the movement was intense as always. Counselors came and went, messengers arrived with news from the battlefield. But to Bathsheba, it was just another day in the calm of her home. With her husband Uriah away, fighting for Israel, she continued her routine, taking care of tasks and finding moments of rest in the intimacy of her house. When the heat of the day began to weigh, she decided to cool off. The bath was a private moment, a little relief amid the busyness. At that moment, without her knowing, something was about to happen that would change her life forever. From the top of the palace, David walked down the terrace, perhaps trying to clear his mind, or simply observing the city he ruled. And that's when he saw her. Bathsheba's figure caught his attention in an irresistible way. The way the sun played with the water on her skin, the serenity of her movements, everything seemed to conspire to hold his gaze. David was a man used to power and the desires it brought, but at that moment, his desire crossed the boundary of what was right. He didn't know who she was, but something in her posture, perhaps even the simplicity of the moment, made him determined to find out. David ordered his men to bring her to the palace. Messengers were sent discreetly so as not to raise suspicions. When she arrived, she was not just a woman before a king. It was the beginning of a choice that would seal their fate. When Bathsheba was taken to the palace, she could barely imagine the intentions behind the summons. It was King David who had called her, and to anyone in Israel, a royal summons was something that could not be refused. She entered the imposing gates, perhaps with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The palace had an air of grandeur, but that night something felt different. There was a strange silence, as if even the corridors were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come. When she met David, the conversation began with kind words. He was known for his charisma, and it was not hard to understand why so many admired him. However, David's gaze at that moment carried something deeper, a spark that went beyond simple curiosity. He treated her as someone special, as if she were the only person that mattered right then. Perhaps Bathsheba was confused or even flattered, but it was impossible to ignore the weight of the situation. The time they spent together was enough for boundaries to be crossed. That night, David and Bathsheba succumbed to the desire that had overtaken them. What began as a meeting between a king and a subject quickly became a heavy secret, something both knew could not be revealed. She was a married woman, and David, though a king, knew he had broken both God's law and the people's trust. A few days later, the tension increased when Bathsheba sent a message to the king. Her words were simple but heavy with meaning. "I am pregnant." David, who might have thought he could move on without consequence, now saw that his choice had triggered something far bigger. What he did next would define not only Bathsheba's fate, but the fate of the entire kingdom. "I am pregnant." Simple, direct, impossible to ignore. The news wouldn't just bring scandal, it would endanger everything David had built. How could he justify a child with the wife of Uriah, one of the most loyal men in the kingdom? The solution was not easy, but fear led him to act with haste and desperation. David called Uriah back from the war using a false excuse, claiming to want news from the battlefield. When Uriah arrived, he suspected nothing. He was pure-hearted, loyal to the king, to his fellow soldiers, and most of all, to his wife. But David had a plan. Send him home, let him sleep with his wife, make it seem like the child was his. It was risky, but David hoped it would work. Only Uriah was different. When David encouraged him to go home, rest, and sleep in his own bed, Uriah refused. "How can I do this while my fellow soldiers sleep in tents on the battlefield?" he said, with a determination that surprised even the king. Uriah spent the night with the palace guards, unaware that his integrity frustrated David's plan. David tried again, offering wine and food, hoping Uriah drunk would go home. But again Uriah stood by his principles. Each attempt left David feeling more trapped, more aware that his mistake could not be hidden so easily. And then, clouded by fear and guilt, David made a decision that would change Uriah's fate forever. A letter, sealed with the king's own seal, was handed to the loyal soldier, unaware that he carried his own death sentence. Uriah delivered the letter faithfully, not knowing it contained his fate. It was cruel irony. The honorable man delivered into Joab's hands the king's command for his own death. David had written coldly, "Put Uriah on the front line of the fiercest battle, then retreat, so he is struck down and dies." These words, cold as steel, were David's desperate attempt to erase a mistake growing darker by the day. In the battlefield, Uriah fought as always, fearless, loyal, unaware of the plan written behind his back. The fight was fierce. Arrows screamed across the sky like metal thunder. Joab obeyed the king, placing Uriah where the fighting was deadliest, where survival was nearly impossible. Uriah advanced as the warrior he always was, brave to the last breath. He fell in battle, surrounded by enemies, betrayed by the very king he served. When the news reached David, the king received it with chilling calm. Perhaps he sighed in relief, thinking the secret was safe. He sent words of comfort to Joab, saying, "Don't worry. The sword devours one as well as another." A hollow attempt to soothe his guilt with empty words. After the mourning period, David quickly took Bathsheba as his wife, trying to cover sin with a veil of normality. But his actions did not escape the eyes of God. The prophet Nathan was sent to the palace, carrying a message like a sharp arrow, meant to expose the truth and confront the king with the weight of his choices. When the prophet Nathan entered the palace, the air seemed to carry an invisible weight. He was a respected man, known for speaking directly in the name of God. David received him, perhaps with a smile of false tranquility, but Nathan came with a message the king did not expect. He began not with accusations, but with a simple story, a parable that seemed harmless. "There were two men in a certain city," Nathan began. "One was rich, having many sheep and oxen. The other was poor, having only a small lamb which he loved like a daughter. He fed it, it slept in his arms. It was all he had. One day, the rich man received a guest, and instead of taking one of his own flock, he took the poor man's lamb to prepare a feast. As Nathan told the story, David listened closely, his heart burning with anger. "This man must die," David shouted furiously. "He must pay 4 times over for what he did because he showed no mercy." Silence filled the room. Then Nathan looked directly at David with a firmness that made the king tremble. "You are the man," said the prophet. His words fell like thunder. David stood still, as if each word from Nathan cut into his soul. The prophet revealed everything. God knew of the sin, of the adultery with Bathsheba, of Uriah's death, and David's attempt to cover it all up. God's judgment was clear. "The sword will never depart from your house. You despised the word of the Lord. The child born to you will die." Nathan's words shook David to the core. He finally recognized the weight of what he had done. But the announcement of judgment was only the beginning of a painful road that he and Bathsheba would have to walk. And when their son was born, Nathan's prophecy began to take form, dark and unavoidable. The birth of David and Bathsheba's child brought a mix of joy and dread to the palace, but that happiness was short-lived, like a candle flickering before being snuffed out. The baby became gravely ill, and Nathan's warning loomed over everyone. David, consumed by anguish, fell to the ground in fasting and prayer. He would not eat. He would not sleep. He spent his days crying out to God, pleading for mercy. Maybe he believed that deep repentance could reverse the sentence. Meanwhile, Bathsheba sat in silent agony, alone with a pain few could comprehend. Her grief was not only fear of losing a child, but the torment of knowing he was the price of choices she and David had made. The days dragged on, and the royal house seemed shrouded in a darkness no golden ornament could lift. But the illness was relentless, and the child passed away. When David's servants told him, they expected him to collapse in deeper sorrow, but instead David rose, washed his face, changed his clothes, and went to the temple to worship God. The servants were stunned. "Why now, after the child has died, do you act this way?" they asked. David answered with a solemn calm, "While the child was alive, I fasted and wept, thinking, 'Who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." The loss was crushing, but it marked the beginning of change in both David and Bathsheba. God still had plans for her, and when another son was born, he was not only a sign of hope, but a living promise that even in ruin something new can arise. Solomon, God's chosen, was destined to be more than a prince on David's throne. His birth brought an unexpected light to the palace. Unlike the first child who came under the weight of divine judgment, Solomon was born into grace. From the start, something was different. God, through the prophet Nathan, declared his love for the boy and gave him a special name, Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord. It was as if Solomon carried a second chance, not only for David and Bathsheba, but for all of Israel. Bathsheba, who had lived through so many highs and lows, found a new purpose in her son. She raised him carefully, knowing he was destined for something great. Meanwhile, palace life continued, full of intrigue and rivalry among David's older sons, each fighting for a claim to the throne. Though Bathsheba was one of David's wives, she was reminded constantly that Solomon's path to kingship would not be easy. As David aged, the murmurs about succession grew louder. Adonijah, one of David's older sons, believed the throne was rightfully his. He began acting as king, hosting banquets, gathering allies, and building his base of power. But Bathsheba would not remain silent. Determined to secure Solomon's future, she sought out the prophet Nathan, a loyal ally. Together, they devised a plan to ensure David honored his promise. Bathsheba approached the king in his final days, reminding him of the vow he had made, that Solomon would be the chosen successor. Every word was spoken with care, a balance of reverence and urgency. And while the palace stirred with plots, a final decision needed to be made before it was too late. The palace was tense. Adonijah, full of confidence, already acted as if the throne were his. He gathered powerful allies and organized a grand banquet, inviting commanders, priests, and even influential court members to strengthen his claim. It was a bold move, and everyone knew this was more than just a celebration. He proclaimed himself king, while David, weakened by age, seemed increasingly distant from the kingdom's affairs. But amid this storm, Bathsheba wasted no time. She knew she had to act fast to protect Solomon's future. With Nathan's help, the prophet who so often spoke for God in the kingdom, she prepared a careful plan. As Adonijah gathered momentum, Bathsheba entered the king's chambers where David lay, aged and fragile yet still possessing royal authority. With a calm but firm voice, she reminded him of his promise. "My lord, you swore to the Lord your God that Solomon my son would succeed you as king. But now Adonijah has declared himself king. If nothing is done, Solomon and I will be treated as enemies once you are gone." There was emotion in her words, but also wisdom. She knew David, even in his frailty, would understand the urgency. As she spoke, Nathan entered, confirming everything and emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. David listened, and within him stirred the strength of the great leader he once was. He made his decision, he summoned his counselors and issued clear orders. Solomon will be anointed king today. He would be placed on the royal mule and paraded through Jerusalem, proclaimed before all the people. When the king's command spread, the palace erupted in a mix of celebration and shock. Adonijah and his allies heard the sound of joy echoing from the city. Suddenly their banquet turned to silence. But for Bathsheba, the moment marked a new beginning, her rise beside the throne. Solomon's coronation was like a flash of divine light, scattering the kingdom's conspiracies. With David's order, Solomon was anointed king before the people. The sound of trumpets rang throughout Jerusalem, a sign that God's will was being fulfilled. The young prince, now king, was received with shouts of joy. Even Adonijah's supporters realized that opposing Solomon was to oppose the Lord's plan. Bathsheba, who had seen so many twists in her life, became the queen mother, a position of immense honor and influence. She not only advised Solomon, but stood as a symbol of strength and restoration. Despite the wounds of the past, her role was clear: preserve the kingdom's stability and support her son in the grand mission ahead. From the beginning of his reign, Solomon proved he was different. He sought God's wisdom above all else. In a dream, when the Lord appeared to him, Solomon asked not for wealth or power, but for discernment, to govern with justice. Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. It was a request that pleased God, reflecting the spiritual legacy David and Bathsheba passed on. Solomon's wisdom became legendary. His rule brought peace and prosperity unlike any Israel had seen before. But even in the brightness of this new era, memories of the past remained. Every step Bathsheba took through the palace echoed with the past. From the terrace where David first saw her, to the place where Nathan confronted him, from the cries over her firstborn's death to the joy of Solomon's coronation. Her story, intertwined with Israel's destiny, proved that God, in his boundless mercy, can turn even the darkest chapters into something beautiful. Bathsheba's journey is not just about survival. It is about transformation through grace. She entered the story as a woman pulled into a storm not of her making, her name tied forever to a scandal that shook a kingdom. But her life did not end in shadows. It unfolded into a legacy of strength, wisdom, and divine purpose. She endured heartbreak, betrayal, and the unbearable loss of a child. Yet through it all, she rose, not with loud declarations, but with quiet resilience. She became the mother of a king, the guardian of a promise, and a vital thread in the lineage that would one day give birth to the Messiah. Her story is a powerful reminder that God does not discard the broken, He rebuilds them, that no mistake is too deep, no shame too heavy for Him to redeem and restore. In Bathsheba's silence, there was courage. In her waiting, there was trust. And in her legacy, there is hope for all of us. She shows us that even when we feel like background characters in someone else's story, God is writing something far more eternal. Her life whispers a truth we all need to hear. Redemption is not just possible, it's part of the plan. So when you think of Bathsheba, think not just of the fall, but of the rise, not just of sorrow, but of purpose. She was not forgotten by God, and neither are you. If this story stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel, because here we don't just revisit the Bible, we reawaken its voices and rediscover the grace that still speaks today.